Hey everybody, and welcome back to Critical Crafting. This is Dylan, your crafting DM here. Today, I am going to show you all how to make your very own do-it-yourself beholder. I'm pretty excited. I hope you guys are too. For this project, you're going to need a plastic skull, as well as some green stuff, some soldering wire, some clear acrylic rods, some little glass eyes, a big glass eye, and some paint. I'm going to go over each of these products in depth as we go through the video, and if you need to get any of these, there will be links for the products in the description below. The eye is kind of the centerpiece for the beholder, so the first thing I do is map out where it's going to go. I'm using a paintbrush to trace around the glass eye, then I use my X-Acto knife to cut the plastic away. Green stuff is kind of the bread and butter for making this beholder, so when you're using this, it has two parts. You blend the two of them together just by squishing them with your hands until you get that nice green consistency on the right. Once that's done, you can fill in the eyes and start building an eyebrow with little kind of rolled pieces and then blend them onto the beholder. I like to use a wooden tool or clay tools to create texture. Here I'm building up what's going to be his gums, so I put a little thin piece of green stuff on there and then use a clay or wooden tool to make the little gum shapes. I do the same to tweak the little eyelid that I've made here. Yeah! To make the teeth, I roll small, sort of pyramid-shaped pieces of the green stuff, and then I just press them in. I use small tools or even my X-Acto knife to reshape them and make them look like they're supposed to. Because I'm building on top of the skull, I don't really have to worry about the anatomy, which is one of the nice things of building on top of that. But I can make some cool little wrinkles and other little shapes that make him look pretty cool just by adding texture. Green stuff can be a little bit thick and tacky to work with, which is why I really like using the clay modeling tools, and I'll link those in the description below. Also, if you find it's a little sticky, just apply some water and that'll help. The more wrinkles, bumps, and other weird texture you add to the beholder, the better it's going to look at the end. Here I'm making the spines for the side of the head, and essentially this is just a large sort of pyramid shape that I squeeze together and then use my tool to press the sides in. You gotta add the eye stalks, and to do this I take my X-Acto knife and kind of use it like a drill, just sticking it in and swirling it around so that I can fit the soldering wire into those spots to make my eye stalks. I'm using 1.6 millimeter soldering wire, which is pretty easy to cut with wire cutters. I snip those to about 2-inch lengths, but you can do whatever length you want. Now I just use my hot glue gun and put those pieces that I've cut into the skull. Stuff stays pretty flexible for an hour to 2 hours, so I'm actually gluing the jaw in place with hot glue to make sure it doesn't wiggle too much. Next, I'm going to take a little bit of that green stuff and I'm going to stick it onto the soldered wire. So this is what's going to serve as his eye stalk tendril. And all I do is pinch that around and then sort of roll it together so that I have a nice smooth texture. Then as usual, I blend that in with my tool. Now to add in the tiny eyes. These are the Julie Wang 8mm 100-piece mixed-style Dragon Eye Round Time Gem Covered Glass Kabakan Dome Jewelry Finding Cameo Pendant Settings product. All that I've done is stick a little piece of green stuff to the back of it, stick that onto the little eye stalk, and then blend it in with my tool. To help my eyes look like they're not just stuck on, I roll little rounded pieces of the green stuff and then use those to make sort of eyelids around the eyes I've already stuck on. this is where clay modeling tools really come in handy to get you some detail. I don't need to cover all of the skull, but I like to add some little textures and warts and things so that I have some interesting stuff for when I'm painting this guy. So all I do is make little balls of green stuff, stick them on, and then use one of my tools to blend those into the skull. Once that's done, your beholder should look a little bit something like this, and we're ready to paint. But first, we need his flight base. This is going to help us so that we don't have to be holding him the whole time we're painting him. So I take those clear acrylic rods that I bought, and I just use a saw to saw it down. It fits really well into the hole that's already in the skull, and then I use super glue to glue it on. Next, I gotta fix him to the base. I'm using a 3D printed base, which is easy to do the same thing I did to the skulls, creating a hole that I can put that acrylic rod into. But if you don't have a 3D printer, I'll link some bases you can do this with. I stick that into the base, and using my super glue, adhere him down. I always use quick-set spray or instant-set spray when I'm using super glue because I'm not very patient. Okay, now we can paint this guy. I'm using flat brown and flat black from Vallejo, and I mix these together and put on my base coat. And for the gums, I apply a flat red. Now I want to add some highlights, so I'm using Beastly Brown and just sort of dry brushing over some areas to make them pop a little bit more. Here I use the flat red again and put that inside around my eye. Don't worry too much if you get paint on the eye because it'll scrape off really easily. Add some highlights to my gums. So I'm using the Army Painter Barbarian Flesh and the Model Color Light Flesh together to create some pretty cool highlights on there. I do the same around the eyes, adding some highlights so that the grooves have a deeper feel to them. Finally, for my most intense highlights, I add a little bit of white to the mixture I've already made, so it really makes things pop. The teeth get a straight coat of white paint. You're probably going to have to do a few layers of this. As you know, I normally work in layers, so here I'm adding another layer by mixing the white with the brown that I've used and creating some more highlights with dry brushing. Once that's done, I use my Army Painter Soft Tone Wash to add another layer of depth to the beholder. This is also going to make him a little bit slimy looking, which I kind of like. I wanted the kind of bumps and warts to pop even more, so what I did was mix a little bit of yellow ochre with the flat brown and the white so that I could kind of make these pop, and then blended that in with the color that was already there. I found that I had kind of overdone this, so I took the flat brown, went back in, and then kind of blended things a little bit more. For me, painting is always a bit of a learning experience, even if I've done it a bunch of times. If I'm painting a homemade model or a new model, sometimes things just don't work the way you want them to. So lots of mixing of, the ochre yellow with the brown, with the white to get the right consistency I wanted. So here I've taken more of that ochre yellow and then I'm applying it onto the warts to make them pop out. And I do the same thing, adding some dark browns and then some lighter yellows onto the eye stalks to give them the illusion that one area is kind of higher than the other one. I also applied some of the yellow, brown, and white highlights to those spikes to make them stand out. Even with all of the texture that I added, he just didn't have quite enough. So I decided to add some sort of polka dots and cheat a little bit by giving him some added highlights and then blending those in with the added flat polka dots. This way it gives him the illusion of having more texture than he really does and makes the paint job more interesting. Again, I wanted some more dynamic lighting, so I decided to add some yellow and white highlights in a few of the areas to make them stick out just a little bit more. All these added layers do is help things to blend a little bit better and look more realistic and a lot less flat. So I decided to put some of those whites and that onto the bulbs, and then blend those in a little bit with the wash from Army Painter. These added steps of blending together some highlighted areas with some darker areas are what really make this piece flow and make it feel like he's a real living thing. Here I'm just applying more of that dynamic lighting I was talking about earlier by kind of having transitions from light to dark on those eye stalks. So putting some lighter yellows on the areas where they bend and then the areas closest to the eyes. Just gave it a little more variety. After that, I hit it with another wash to help things blend in, this time with a dark tone. I wasn't entirely satisfied with the red in the eyes and in the lips and gum area, so what I decided to do was take some Tamiya Gloss Red and apply that in all those areas to give them more of a glossy feel and a bloody feel. And then for the teeth, I put a glaze medium from Vallejo on top to give them that extra added shine. Here I'm simply adding some more polka dots. You can see I added a lot more close together near the tops of the tentacles, and then I'm just applying them pretty much everywhere. And just make sure that you apply them in a variety of ways, where sometimes they're close together, sometimes they're farther apart, and use the yellow ochre to do this. Now I'm just adding small sections of white on top of those polka dots that give them the illusion again of sticking out a little bit more. Lastly, I decided to paint the base. I'm just using some cheap apple barrel paint at this point because I'm not too concerned with it. I used Christmas green and bright blue, mix these together with a little bit of white and gray, and I get a pretty consistent looking sort of cavernous color. Then I add a little bit more white, apply that on there, and give it a little bit of a highlight with a dry brush. So there it is. At this point, you now have everything you need to know to make an awesome do-it-yourself beholder. I hope to see some of these on Facebook or in the comments. Would really love to see the things you guys are making, and we will see you all next time on Critical Crafting.